Hello, my name is Callie Ennis and I am a junior at St. Joseph High School in Miss Lowell's Period B AP English Language Composition class. Today I will be analyzing and discussing key points from the book The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby was written in 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald, who had an interesting life career of writing literature.
The author of The Great Gatsby is Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald. He was born on September 24, 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota. His father was an unsuccessful businessman, so the family lived off of Fitzgerald's mother's sizable inheritance. His mother's wealth provided opportunities for young Fitzgerald to mingle with the social elite in his hometown. But it wasn't quite enough for him to be accepted into the highest class of the social hierarchy. Like Nick's character, Fitzgerald left Minnesota for an Ivy League education. Fitzgerald attended Princeton, joined the Army, and later moved to New York City. When he was 22 years old, he fell in love with socialite Zelda Sayre. Although Zelda claimed to love Fitzgerald, she refused to marry him until he was rich. It wasn't until Fitzgerald published his first novel, This Side of Paradise, in 1920 that Zelda deemed him appropriate to marry. As his writing career blossomed, he and Zelda enjoyed their celebrity with lavish parties, heavy drinking, and extensive travels. However, this lifestyle came with a price. For years, Fitzgerald struggled with alcoholism and depression, which wreaked havoc on his career and health. Ultimately, these factors contributed to the heart attack that killed him on December 21, 1940, at the age of 44. Many aspects of Fitzgerald's life are mirrored in The Great Gatsby. Details are scattered throughout his work in the form of character traits, story settings, and conflicts. When The Great Gatsby was first released, it received mediocre reviews and sold poorly. By the time of Fitzgerald's death, the author was largely forgotten. When the U.S. entered the Second World War, they gave copies of The Great Gatsby to soldiers to improve their morale. In 1944, The Great Gatsby had sold
The Great Gatsby is a novel set in the Roaring Twenties, delving into the idea of the American dream through the lifestyle of Jay Gatsby. He is a millionaire, and the novel is narrated by Nick Carraway. Wealth, social expectations are revealed about Gatsby and his authentic life.
The Great Gatsby is about the efforts of this one man, Jay Gatsby, to reinvent himself. The narrator of the story is Nick Carraway, who moves out to New York from the Midwest and ends up living next door to Gatsby. We see the whole story from Nick's point of view, as he meets people in New York's wealthy social scene and gradually gets to know Gatsby. Nick kind of falls in love with Gatsby and what he represents. Gatsby is an irrepressible dreamer. He has a really extravagant lifestyle and throws incredible parties, but this persona is completely his own invention. He actually grew up poor, and his real name isn't even Gatsby, it's James Gatz. Years earlier, he fell in love with a rich girl named Daisy, and couldn't marry her because he didn't have any money. The book is set in the summer of 1922. At the beginning of the story, Nick Carraway moves to New York from the Midwest to begin his career selling bonds. He works in Manhattan, but he rents a little house way out on Long Island, in the town of West Egg. His house is next door to a giant mansion. Nick goes to see Daisy and Tom, some rich friends he knows from the Midwest who now live in nearby East Egg, Long Island. Over dinner, he picks up on the fact that Daisy is unhappy in her marriage, and that Tom has a girlfriend. He also meets Jordan Baker, a famous golfer, whom he starts dating a little later in the book. Later that evening, after he goes home, he sees his next-door neighbor, Mr. Gatsby, looking out over the water in the direction of Tom and Daisy's house. There's a green light on the dock by Daisy's house that you can just see. To get back and forth between West Egg and Manhattan, Nick has to pass through an ugly and depressing area filled with ash heaps. There's a gas station in this area, and a billboard with big eyes on it, advertising an optometrist. One Sunday, when Nick is on the train in this area, headed to Manhattan, Tom makes him get off and meet his girlfriend Myrtle. Myrtle is married to the man who owns the gas station, and she lives above a garage. Tom keeps an apartment in the city where he sees Myrtle. They all go there and have a party. Nick winds up going home with another man, a photographer named Mr. McKee. At the mansion next door to Nick's, parties go on all night long, every night. One day, Gatsby's chauffeur delivers an invitation to Nick from Gatsby, so Nick goes to one of the parties. Crowds of people come, drink heavily, and dance. He sees Jordan Baker there, and the two of them stick together. He meets Gatsby, and they talk about their shared experiences in Europe in World War I. Gatsby is nice to Nick, and they strike up a friendship. One day in July, Gatsby drives Nick into the city. On the way, he tells Nick about how he went to Oxford, because it's a family tradition, and how he inherited a lot of money, and spent time hunting big game, and collecting rubies, and trying to get over something sad that happened to him. It sounds bogus, and Nick doesn't know whether to believe him. Gatsby tells Nick he's going to ask him for a favor that day, but that Jordan Baker is going to explain it. They have lunch with a man named Meyer Wolfsheim, a friend of Gatsby's whom Gatsby says fixed the 1919 World Series. Later that day, Jordan explains to Nick that Gatsby and Daisy fell in love years before, when Gatsby was stationed at Camp Taylor in Kentucky, and Gatsby was an officer. Daisy stayed in love with him, and almost ran off to New York to see him off. After the war was over, she got engaged to Tom Buchanan, but she almost didn't marry him because she got a letter from Gatsby. Now Gatsby wants to see Daisy, and he wants Nick to invite her to tea, because he wants Daisy to see his big house. Nick does what Gatsby wants, and invites Daisy and Gatsby over to his house for tea. Gatsby and Daisy are awkward and embarrassed at first, but Nick leaves them alone for a half hour, and when he comes back, they've clearly decided they're still in love. All three of them go to Gatsby's mansion, where Gatsby gives Daisy a tour of all of his rooms and expensive possessions. Daisy begins to cry when Gatsby shows her and Nick all the very costly shirts he had sent over from England, saying she's sad because she's never seen such beautiful shirts before. From then on, she starts coming to see Gatsby and having an affair with him. Daisy and Tom go to one of Gatsby's parties, where they see the usual crowd, plus a famous Hollywood actress and director. Daisy doesn't like it, so afterward, Gatsby fires all of his servants and stops having parties. Nick backtracks and tells us some of Gatsby's life story. Gatsby was the son of poor farmers in Minnesota. He wanted to become rich, but he also wanted to seem like someone who had always been rich, so he invented a new identity and new name for himself. He made friends with a rich man named Dan Cody and worked for him on his yacht. After Cody died, he became an officer, and he fell in love with Daisy at Camp Taylor. He was able to attract a rich girl because he had good manners, and the uniform made it impossible to tell if he was rich. Daisy waited for him for several years, but after the war she married Tom. Gatsby devoted the next few years to becoming rich and getting her back. On the hottest day of the summer, Gatsby and Nick go to Tom and Daisy's house. Gatsby is hoping to publicly confront Tom and have Daisy say she's leaving him. The whole party, including Jordan Baker, all drive to Manhattan and get a suite at the Plaza Hotel. Gatsby does confront Tom, and Daisy does reluctantly say that she never loved Tom and that she wants to be with Gatsby. Tom says it's all nonsense, that Daisy's not leaving him, and that he knows Gatsby is a criminal because he's had him investigated. Gatsby made his money in organized crime and selling illegal liquor. Daisy breaks down and admits that it's not really true that she never loved Tom. Tom sees that he's won, so he sends Daisy and Gatsby to drive home together in Gatsby's car. On the way back, in another car, Nick and Tom and Jordan discover that there's been an accident, and Myrtle has been hit and killed by Gatsby's car. Nick takes Tom home, and outside Tom and Daisy's house, he sees Gatsby lurking. Gatsby explains that Daisy was driving the car, and he's covering up for her. Nick goes up to the house and sees Tom and Daisy together in the kitchen, eating chicken. He can see that Daisy isn't going to leave Tom. Gatsby still can't believe he's lost her, though.
Myrtle's husband, George Wilson, who owns the gas station, tracked down the owner of the yellow car. Ultimately, Tom tells him it belongs to Gatsby. George Wilson goes to Gatsby's house and kills him while he's floating in his pool. Nick tries to get people to come to Gatsby's funeral, but hardly anybody does. One of the few people to show up is Gatsby's father. He says he is proud of all that his son has achieved. He shows Nick a book with self-improvement schedule that Gatsby owned when he was younger. Nick breaks up with Jordan over the phone and moves back to the Midwest. Gatsby dies mainly from his obsession with the past. He can also not let his love for Daisy go because of what they had before. She represents a lot for him. For example, money in the upper class. By winning Daisy, he believes he deserves his spot in the upper class and is no longer faking anything. The novel shows that with dreams, anyone can become anything that they may want, while contrastly, the book implies this is somewhat of a lie. Fitzgerald utilizes several rhetorical devices when writing The Great Gatsby for the purpose of drawing in the reader. The first device that stood out to me when reading was foreshadow. Foreshadow acts as a warning for a future event. For example, if a reader mentions something bad that could possibly happen to them in the future storyline, it happens. It begins with Jay Gatsby's optimism.
He quotes, "Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can." This foreshadows the ultimate disillusion he faces while trying to pursue his passion for Daisy and the American dream.
Another example is one of Nick's initial reflections on Gatsby.
He says, "You can't repeat the past." Here, he realizes that the past cannot be redone and foreshadows the future when they return to the former era in a sense.
The second device that stood out was symbolism. Symbolism is anything that represents itself and stands for something else. Usually, a symbol is something concrete, such as an object, action, character, or scene, that represents something more abstract. But they can also be much more complex. It is important because it shows the themes of the book. In the story, there are several significant symbols that have such deeper meanings than what they just appear. For example, the green light is proven to represent Gatsby's dreams and, most importantly, his desire for a future with Daisy. His obsession with the light through the storyline shows the reader that all along, Gatsby admires these values rather than just his parties and the people that come. Another prominent symbol is the Valley of Ashes. The Valley of Ashes in the novel is the industrial wasteland that you must pass through to go to New York City, from the West Egg. It represents the moral and social decay of society as a result of the pursuit of the American dream. It shows that wanting something such as that could not be all that one may think. The largest changing symbol in the novel is the weather. It changes throughout the novel as Gatsby's mood goes up and down. It reflects the emotional state of Gatsby throughout the novel, as events go on well for him, but they also do not. Specifically, this is called pathetic fallacy. Symbolism is important in the novel because it shows several deeper meanings than what has originally appeared by the third important rhetorical device is juxtaposition. Juxtapose is a comparison between two contrasting ideas. It is powerful due to its effect on emphasis and enhanced meaning. An example of this includes the Valley of Ashes in comparison to the East and West Egg. The Valley of Ashes is an industrially run-down area with lack of poverty. The East and West Egg are affluent. This relation highlights the stark differences of communities so close to each other and how pursuit of the American dream results in poverty and despair majority of the time. Another example includes Gatsby's luxurious, over-the-top parties in relation to his genuine feelings of isolation. This comparison highlights the lavish lifestyle that he appears, but in reality, he is lonely. It shows the emptiness that can truly underlay poverty. Juxtaposition is powerful due to its effects on emphasis and enhanced meaning. Often when discussing one side of a situation, other factors are revealed about the compared side that would not have been shown without the comparison. Another rhetorical device used in the novel is epistrophe. Epistrophe is the repetition of a word at the end of a successive clause or sentence. In Chapter 6, Nick Carraway reflects on Gatsby's character and background.
He also states, "He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly." It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hoped to convey. Precisely at that point, it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or two over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Some time before he introduced himself, I'd got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. The first quotes creates repetition of a phrase that is emphasized further in the work.
It creates a rhythmic and epithetic tone. This creates a reinforced effect that Gatsby's idea of his dream is inevitably unreachable, but he still holds on to the illusion. While having a small effect, epistrophe creates an emphasis on important values or ideas. In this novel, it appears in one of the most important lines of the story. It holds the idea that no matter how unachievable Gatsby's dream may be, he still holds on to it. Imagery is prominent in the novel, as for the reader, the book is brought to life through visuals. Imagery is visually descriptive details or figurative language that describes ideas or situations in a novel. Imagery used throughout the majority of the novel, as several parts of the story must be visually described to understand the situation at an advanced level.
The Valley of Ashes is described with depth from the beginning of the novel. This is a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, with the transcendent effort of men who move dimmingly and already crumbing through the powdery air. With this description, the reader is able to visualize the appearance of the Valley of Ashes, a key location to the theme of the novel.
The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are symbolic.
They are described as, "But above the gray land and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive, after a moment, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Their retinas are 1 yard high. They look out to no face, but instead, from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles which pass over a non-existent nose."
While being a highly symbolic part of the book, being able to visualize it keeps it a prominent detail for the reader as it represents themes of the book: morality, spirituality, and consequences of the American dream. The Great Gatsby is a novel with deeply symbolic features and major themes presented through the life of Jay Gatsby. With the use of rhetorical devices such as foreshadow, symbolism, juxtaposition, apostrophe, and imagery, and many more, F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author, is able to present these themes to the reader while telling an entertaining story of the life in the Roaring Twenties. Thank you for listening.